guys, how's it going? Welcome back to Kitchen Table Meta. And so today's video, I'm going to take a little bit of time here. I'm going to talk about the updated ban and limited list that Bandai released on us today. I'm actually really surprised this happened. I had no idea this was coming, though I think a lot of the cards on this list are no surprise at all, and something that we've talked about a couple months ago on a podcast with Jordan Markle, Richard Zapp, Aaron Anthony, and myself. We did KTM Talk number 1. Actually, every card we talked about, or I'd say every card on this list, we talked about during that stream. So I would say that the timing of the list was a little surprising, but none of the cards on here were surprising at all. And in fact, I think they actually missed a couple cards I'll talk about at the end of the video as well. And so I'm going to kind of go over the cards what I feel about them, and then at the end talk about these new upcoming cards. So first, we'll start up with Flute. Now, Flute was taken from limited to 1 to just being completely banned altogether. And I know this is one that I think caught a couple people off surprise. They thought, hey, it's already limited to 1. Why would they ban it? And I think there's a couple reasons why. I talk about it really quick. Number one, and I think Jordan, Markle talked about this during the stream. He's expressed his concerns about this on the community. Jordan being our national championship winner and ran Storm, obviously, at the national championship, winning in the finals in the Storm mirror. And one thing he did talk a lot about during the podcast was that he hates the limits to 1 with cards like this because they're so powerful when you draw that 1 of and your opponent doesn't. So in the mirror match, it's a little weird, right? So if you have that you draw that Flute, right, and you're able to return the Goten to your hand, or return a powerful card to your hand, or even use it as returning a blocker to your hand, or to your opponent's hand. It's very, very good. And if your opponent never sees that card, then obviously you would just have an innate advantage by just drawing better than your opponent, which is never something you really want to encourage in a card game. Second of all, another reason I think that this card was probably hit from limited to 1 to ban is also it's just an abusable card, right? Being able to return a card that costs 3 or less to your opponent's hand or your hand just kind of creates abuse even at 1 of. I mean, there's so many good cards to hit. I mean, Haru is a good card you can hit with it. It isn't necessarily a card that's it can be played in any deck, right? So I think it's really just important. It kind of limits future design. You'll hear me talk about this a lot when we talk about cards. I hate cards that limit future design, right? You hate cards that are like, man, this card is really well balanced. It's a great card, but Flute exists, so it's we have to change or we can't print that card. You just don't want those type of cards around. Also, even in the Storm or the 1-2 swap mirror match, or if you were trying to stop Storm, or that's 1-2 swap. If you played cards like Crisis Crusher, for example, I've seen it happen a lot on stream. I casted a lot of matches where it's happened, and players would play out Crisis Crusher and be like, okay, I'm safe. And then, you'd be like, I got the 1 of Flute, return Crisis Crusher to your hand, and now I can attack. It just felt kind of weird. And so I agree with this. I think it's fine. I would much rather cards be banned than limited. I'm not a really huge fan of limited cards. That's not to say that I think some cards can't, work as limited cards. I just like it. It feels neater when everything's just banned. It's easier to tell people, especially new players, hey, look, this card's banned, instead of saying we can only run 1 in your deck. It just feels a little bit weird. But yeah, so those are the reasons I think the card was hit. I completely agree with this. I think it's a great change. And let's get on to the next card, which is Goten. I'm actually a little surprised that Goten got hit. I do think that swap in itself, or the Storm deck, needed to be hit. I think everybody can agree with that. Obviously, with Clash of Fates right around the corner, as in I think it releases tomorrow. There was cards, and there the Future Air Goku is a good example of cards that were intended to hit Storm. Though I do think it's important to remember that even though those cards exist, it doesn't mean they're going to be bad if if 1-2 Storm or 1-2 swap Storm isn't hit. And so what I mean by that is if let's say these changes, like the ban to Goten, the ban to Flute, we also obviously are seeing Trunks being limited down the list as well. If this just kills Storm, then I don't think that means that the Future Air is now bad, right? That card is still very good, and I think that's something really important to remember, is that just because the format is changing or a deck is becoming less powerful, it doesn't mean that these new cards aren't. I mean, having the ability to make it so your opponent can attack with cards that cost 2 or less is huge in the future of the game. Remember, we don't know what's going to be printed, and I'll get to that in a second, but it's important to remember that these cards are still just as good without Storm around. They're still very impactful to the meta. So anyway, back to Goten. I'm sorry, a little tangent there. Goten was banned. It's just completely banned. It's no longer able to be played in tournament play, or obviously at your locals. There's a couple things I think that's good about this card being banned. Number one, it makes the 1/2 swap decks, storm decks, less consistent, which was always the problem with those decks. It wasn't necessarily that what they're doing was, I guess in principle, overpowered or unfair. It was just that Goten made it so they did that every game, every turn. They always had the ability to look at the top three, get the best card. Look at the top three, get the best card. And they were able to use that Goten effect to get the trunks they needed to ready energy, the sensu bean they needed to ready energy, another Goten or another swap target, or whatever they needed. That Mira, the battering laser, whatever they needed, they were able to get it. And Goten just made the deck way too consistent. Now, if you've watched any of my past videos or you watched the band video that we made, you'll know that I don't think necessarily that Goten was unfair at 2, right? So if you just paid 2 and played Goten out, I don't think that made him unfair. I think what made him unfair was the fact that you could play him out on 1, right? You could play out Bardock, you could attack with Bardock, swap into Goten, attack with Goten, get a card off of it, which is very efficient and very good. And so I don't expect, what I actually expect to happen is I actually expect this card to be reprinted as not a Goten, right? Be printed as maybe a Frieza Army card, or as an Earthling or something like that, but still keep that same effect. I don't think it was broken. I think just the Goku's lineage tag is what made Goten kind of broken and a little unfun. And I think obviously you could have banned the Bardock, you could have banned something else, but I think really if you break down the problem, it was really the Goten. I think a lot of people agreed with that. And so what you can do instead is you can just ban it. It was a BCC promo. It's not that big of a deal. It's like a 10-cent card. You can ban him and then just reprint him in set 6 or the following set as a different card, and it's just cleaner, I think, than to try to errata him and say, hey, look, take Goku's lineage off the card. I mean, that would work too. It's just a little clunky. So instead, just ban this promo, say, hey, we made a mistake, when then they'll reprint him maybe in a different color, or maybe, as a different character trait would be fine. But all in all, I think this is a good ban. I think obviously it's going to hurt Storm, which is what it's intended to do, and that's really the only deck we saw it in. I mean, I would say that it's important to remember that 1/2 swap, the Bardock and the Goten, was just probably the best one drop play. I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head that's better. And so I think a lot of yellow decks just ran 1-drop Bardock, swap into Goten, no matter what. And I think that's important to remember, is that while Storm broke it, that just 1/2 swap was very good, right? Just Bardock and a Goten could be ran in any deck that ran yellow, and was probably the best 2-card combo in the game. And so I think that's another reason it got hit as well. It's not just good in Storm, it's literally playing everything. We have people at my locals playing it in Apes. We have people playing, a blue deck, like a blue Boo deck, and just using Bardock and Goten to make that deck more consistent, right? Look at the top 3, get the cards you need, and then try to win on turn 3 or 4. So yeah, it's not just the swap deck that combo is good in. So I think that's really important to remember as well. Okay, moving on to another card, to the cards that were limited. Starting out, Baby Trunks, little Trunks here, limited to from 4 to 1. Obviously, I think this is a terrific choice. I've talked about this quite a bit. I've talked about it in the National Championship stream. I talked about it quite a bit, how I really feel like this card should be hit and not banned, but limited. Now, my only, I guess, suggestion, as I don't necessarily like the limit to 1. I really wish they would have just limited it to 2. I think that's better, because it still makes it good in aggro. I mean, obviously it's still going to be played as a 1-of, but I don't think you want to kill aggro altogether, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, I suppose. But I think aggro is very important for the game. It's a great archetype to have around. I don't necessarily think that these changes are going to kill aggro, but I do think that the Baby Trunks was a huge component in what made aggro successful. And I think limiting it to 1 makes it, it's obviously still good. I'm sure they'll run it. It's going to be great that one time you play it. But I'd really like to see it just stay to 2. It's less consistent. Even with Goten around, you only can grab 2. That means with Sensu Bean, you only have 6 possibilities of untapping energy, which is still a lot. But yeah, that's just my opinion. I think 2 was better than 1. But it's also important to remember, just like always, and I kind of want to keep reminding you guys, this change doesn't just hit swap; it hits all aggro, which is in I guess in a vacuum is really bad. What I would really like to see them do is similar to what I think their plans are with Goten. As I just wish they would sort of, essentially just ban this card. If they're going to limit it to 1, I'd rather than just ban it altogether, and then go, cool, it's banned. Now we'll just reprint it as a different card, and then possibly do something like make it be only blue energy or untap a green energy, right? Something like that. You put in you make it do its same thing. You just lower the power level just a little bit. I always think the problem with Baby Trunks was never that it untapped energy. It was just an untapped any color energy, which was just super good. So yeah, I mean, there's different ways they can go about it, but I think overall limit to 1 is fine. It's not gonna, it's a good change. It's, it's healthy for the game, as long as they find ways to continue to make aggro playable and there and strong. It's gonna be fine. And I think Baby Trunks it was a little too much. We saw people take 10-minute turns at Nationals, which is just way too much, right? That's just way too good. And obviously, Baby Trunks, Goten, these were 2 cards that were the backbone of these like long turns, which you just don't want in your card game. So. Good choice. Okay, and the last choice here was limiting 3-drop Cell from 4 to 1. This is actually a great change. I love this change. Actually, we actually talked about this in the group quite a bit. We talked about the cell chain, if we thought it was powerful, too powerful, or not. I know Richard Zapp on our banning video said that he wished they would hit the 5-drop. He thought maybe the 5-drop was too good. But I actually, in that video, I actually said I think the 3-drop is too good. I think cell chain is never bad. Unless when you play it on 3, that's like way too good in a lot of situations. Obviously, we haven't seen, androids or cell chain, really come in and dominate anything, or I would say dominate, but they haven't won an event since set 2, like it was like the Hartford event. But I think it's really important to remember that it's just an impressive thing. And I think the thing about the cell chain that people really need to understand is that just because a deck isn't winning doesn't mean it's 3 things. It's oppressive. It limits creativity, which is like a big one, right? Because cell chain really does do that. Like if you play a deck that doesn't have a plan to get cell chained, or sometimes you just build a deck and you're like, I can't beat cell chain, I just lose, right? And someone's going to be playing it. It's a fun deck to play, not necessarily play against, but it's a fun deck to play. It's one of those combos that it feels very thematic, right? It's like I want to use cell and he's going to absorb 17, and then 5 drops absorbing 18. It's really cool. It's very Dragon Ball, and that's great. And so it's going to be around. But it does limit creativity. It does limit diversity. Absolutely. I would argue that everything in this list does that, and some cards they missed also do that. And I think that's probably their overall goal with this, is to limit the power of stuff and making it so we have more fun. That's one thing the Fight Night series we really tried to do with that, and we still see in a lot of these archetypes still shine through, even through the limited format that we created with Fight Night. And so Cell Chain was the big one. That's what I wanted to talk about. We saw Super 17 in almost every night of the Fight Night. Usually both players playing it. The 2 decks we saw the most of was 3-drop Cell, Cell Chain Leader, which was Super 17, and Shenron. We saw those almost every single Fight Night, Monday through Saturday, which was absurd. And I think going Super 17, the new Super 17 combo, the 3-drop, you play them on 3, on 4 you play 3-drop Cell, and then you go into Cell Chain, knock them to 3 cards in hand, and then after that you do your new Super 17 like Hellfighter combo and knock them to 1 card in hand, then play like Toya or a super combo and knock their last card in their hand and just kill them with critical cards. That's super unfun, uninteractive, just terrible. And it's all because of the 3-drop Cell is why that's possible. But I never really kind of thought they would do this, because I was like, man, if they get rid of 3-drop Cell, it makes the 5-drop Cell really weird, because the 5-drop Cell, when it comes into play and it KOs something and draws you a card, that only happens if it union absorbs, right? So if you take away the 3-drop, it has no way to union absorb. I guess they could fix it by printing like a 4-cost cell that did it or something. But I always thought that was really weird. I was like, man, how are they going to do that? And I think their idea was, okay, we'll limit to 1. It does the same thing. It's possible to get the 3-drop Cell out on 3. So it doesn't make the 5-drop completely useless, which I think is fine. The one thing I like about this a lot, since there's only 1 3-drop Cell in the deck, like cold ballusting the 3-drop and then killing it on your following turn is actually a huge play, because they can't just play another one the next turn. So that's really cool. So I think it's going to be fine. I'm worried that this change, the limited to 1-drop 3-drop Cell, will make we'll have the same issues we have with Flute, where like if you're in the mirror match, or sometimes you'll just still have the 3-drop Cell and it might be too powerful still. You don't want like too much RNG to come into a competitive card game. Like you don't want it to be like, if I start with 3-drop Cell in my hand, I win. If I don't, I lose, right? And I only have 1 in my deck, so let's see what happens. I don't think that's going to happen, but it is a concern. The other thing I want to talk about too as I think in theory, and like that this will make the cell leader, the best cell chain leader. And what I mean by that is it'll allow you to use the cell field card. I think it's called Cell's Birth. To use the 5-drop on 3 and still have kind of the same effect, which I think is really neat. I like that Cell would be the best cell chain leader in theory, and we'll see if that in practice plays out. We'll just have to have more testing, but I think that it's possible, and that's really cool. And I think the androids is going to turn into this like kind of mid-rangey aggro deck, which would be really cool. So I think this is a great change. I think again it's going to create that diversity and really make the game feel really good. So that's the changes. That's the changes to the ban list and limit list. I think these are all great changes. I have no real concerns except I'm kind of like 50-50 on limited cards. I think that Baby Trunks and Cell are good examples of cards that should be limited, but we'll see how it plays out. I don't have too much experience with limited cards. Usually the formats I've always played in other card games, the cards are either banned or that's it. You know what I mean? There's no limited. So we'll see. I think Flute was a decent card to be limited, the limited list. I'm glad they took it out, but I think that it didn't like break the format with it being where it was. So I think that these should be okay. So now what I'll do is I want to talk about a couple cards, maybe 4 cards that I think are other possible hits we could see coming, and ones I'm kind of surprised we didn't see. I know you hear a lot of people talking about the kind of the regular cards that you expect. Number 1 would be 7-drop Gogeta. We've heard a lot of people talk about that. I think 7-drop Gogeta is obviously a very abusable card. We saw Chris Welch run 4 decks of the same. They had 4 decks. They were 4 different leaders, 4 different colors. He just put 7-drop Gogeta in all those decks and won Fight Night with it. Won his match at Fight Night with it. It just shows you the power of 7-drop Cell. It's a very powerful 7-drop Cell. 7-drop Gogeta. It's a very powerful card. I understand that concern. I share that concern with a lot of people. But I think it's important to remember with all these changes that Bandai does have perfect knowledge of what's to come. So what I'm trying to say is they know what's coming out in set 6 and the set after that, and they chose to make these changes. So I think that it's fine to criticize these changes. Obviously, that's what we did in the video, but I think it's really important to remember that we do have a set 6 coming in a month, and so let's wait and see what's coming out to really kind of get a full idea. It's very possible to hit 7-drop Gogeta. Remember that. It's possible to print silver bullets and interactive cards that can interact with 7-drop Gogeta. Obviously, it does have deflect. It does have barrier. That seems scary, but they can print like a preemptive strike type card that hits deflect cards, right? We could see cards that can come out and hit the drop area, right? That could make the sparking, because remember, 7-drop Gogeta does need 10 cards in the drop, so they could hit that, right? They could hit the life taking ability, right? You could add in a card that says whenever an opponent would take a life for a card, they have to take 2 life instead or something. You can print interactive cards that makes it possible. You can hit the Union Fusion part, right, where players can't, Union Fusion or something. You can do things, right, and I think that's good, right. Not that you couldn't deal with these other cards in the list, but I don't think that 7-drop Gogeta, you have to ban it to stop it, right. I think it can exist and have silver bullets because in theory it gets played out on turn 5 or turn 7, and I think so. I think it has ample time for you to counterplay it. I do think though that the thing that makes 7-drop Gogeta the scariest is the next card that I think is going to be really scary and something we should really talk about, and that's Shenron, right? The Shenron leader. We've heard a lot of people talk about that card, and I think that card with the 4-drop the Figure of Majesty giving the 7-drop Gogeta, critical, and then he gives them plus 10k in triple strike after they just put 3 cards into your hand. I mean, obviously it's really hard to come back from a 45,000 triple strike triple attack critical, with 3 cards in hand, right? It's just obviously just absurd. One thing to remember though, with 7-drop Gogeta, remember that the new Broly leader is coming out soon. That guy, obviously is a great counter to not only 7-drop Gogeta, but another combo we've heard a lot of people talk about, which is Chain Attack Trunks. That's obviously, that into Zeno is something that people's talked a lot about, though I do think that does has counters. So I'm not really too worried about, any of these cards other than Shenron leader. I do think that needs to be discussed. It needs either a huge counter or something has to happen with that leader because it just has too many ways to break the game, and like I talked about earlier in the video, we don't want to limit future design, right? That's terrible to do. So I absolutely think Shenron does that. He definitely limits future design. Every card you make, you have to think, how broken is this card if it gets to attack 3 times, right? And so really, really scary. Shenron absolutely should be on the list to hit. And one card that I was really surprised wasn't discussed at all, and obviously I haven't even heard the community talk too much about, and that's Haru Haru. This card is absolutely insane. We've heard Pat O'Neill talk about it. I've talked about it. You know, Richard Zapp's talked about it. A lot of us have talked about it quite a bit, and I think this card is just absolutely absurd. You know, obviously, the fact it does so much against only green and yellow cards really hurts diversity. It really hurts the meta. We saw it just completely dominate Fight Night as well with Brian when he played on Sunday. It's just way too good of a card. And in fact, if I was making a, you know, when we do the second round of Fight Night stuff, you know, that card will be banned in Fight Night. Now I'm going to be allowed to play that card because it's too good in certain matchups, you know. And I really am surprised that we've heard nothing from Bandai about it. But I'm sure that's coming. We'll see what happens. Obviously, Burgos hits that card a little bit. And maybe they're waiting to see how that works, but still, I think the card is just absurd. It's just really, really good. And I hate that it's so niche. I hate that it completely obliterates green and yellow leaders and does nothing to you know, the other three types of leaders. It just feels weird. But okay, guys, that's my video on my thoughts of the ban and limited list. I love it. You know, overall, I think it's a great thing. I love to see our game continue to evolve. I love to see the metagame changing. Bandai just does a great job listening to us, guys, and they always will. Obviously, they want your feedback, so please give them your feedback as much as you can. Talk about these changes, but always keep in mind that these aren't, you know, Bandai are making these choices with perfect knowledge of what's to come in set 6 and future, you know, sets. So use that to your advantage. Think about how these, you know, changes work, but also think about what this means for what's coming in set 6. It's a very exciting time. It's a great time to be playing this card game. In my mind, this is the best card game in the world, and you guys are the best community in the world. So thank you guys so much for your love and support. And don't forget to catch me this weekend at the Pro Play Tour in Atlantic City. We'll be streaming live from that venue. Can't wait to talk to you guys about set 6, which is coming very, very soon, and can't wait to share my thoughts of Clash of Fate next week. So guys, love you guys all so much. Thank you again so much for your support, and we'll see you next time.